Al Jazeera obtains exclusive material of a course taught on a U.S. military base, implying that Hamas has influenced the U.S. government at the highest levels. How widespread are messages like these across the U.S. military? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. The course is called Understanding the Threat to America, and in it are hundreds of slides that claim to link the Muslim Civil Liberties Advocacy Organization, CARE, and other American Muslim groups to the Palestinian group Hamas. It was taught to senior military officers at a base in the state of Virginia. This particular course was obtained exclusively by Al Jazeera. Meanwhile, the U.S. military is conducting a review of all material taught to its officers. That's after the website Wired.com exposed another course teaching anti-Islam material. One of the slides presented by Army Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Dooley says the model he's presenting presumes that the Geneva Conventions are, quote, no longer relevant when fighting Muslims. It goes on to say that historical precedents of Dresden, Tokyo, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are applicable to Mecca and Medina's destruction. Dooley has since been suspended, but still holds his position at the college where this material was taught. Now, both the courses obtained by Al Jazeera and Wired.com were voluntary courses, and it's not clear if similar material has been taught in other military colleges. Josh Rushing has more.
Al Jazeera has obtained exclusive documents from the U.S. military. This is a course taught at a base not far from Washington, D.C. to senior officers. The name of the course is called Understanding the Threat to America. Across the first slide, there's actually a banner, and they call it the Outlawed Brief. What we don't have is what the presenter actually said about the course. We just have all of his slides. So it's hard to say exactly what that meant, but one is left to wonder why they called it the Outlawed Brief. The basic thrust of the course is that the United States has been infiltrated by the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas at the highest levels. It actually implicates dozens of mainstream advocacy groups for Islamic issues in the U.S., to include the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, and it says point blank that they are Hamas. It goes on to say that the infiltration goes up to the media. This is Bill O'Reilly, who hosts a popular show in the U.S. on Fox News, interviewing Ibrahim Hooper, who's a spokesperson for CARE in Washington, D.C. They implied that education is controlled now by Muslim infiltrators, and even at the highest levels of the government. This is the executive director of CARE, Nihad Awad, standing next to former President George W. Bush. His face is circled, and above it says Hamas. So there'll be no question left for the students in this class of his association. This is actually signed off by two retired three-star generals from the U.S. Army, as well as the former director of the CIA, R. James Woolsey. I received this from a military officer who was a student at that school. He was concerned that this was being taught and even implied that it was doctrine, so he emailed it to me. Here's what he had to say.
This bigoted conspiracy cabal was both disgusting and so deeply un-American at its core. Those who propagate these materials and those who empower the ones who develop them should be ashamed. Anyone who understands anything at all about the current state of our national security should know that this sort of unhinged fear-mongering only serves to unnecessarily scare the American public into believing in an Islamic boogeyman, and provide ammunition to our detractors that America has lost its footing in the reasonable accommodation of religious freedoms as guaranteed under the First Amendment of our Constitution.
The senior general in the U.S. military, Martin Dempsey, has announced that they're reviewing all military training for this kind of material. They're focusing on the course that was uncovered by Wired.com. We've seen that course, and now we have this course. We're able to trace the source material for both courses back to a military contractor in the Washington, D.C. area called Strategic Engagement. And now that Al Jazeera has uncovered a second course with this type of material, one is left to wonder how many more are out there.
So how widespread is the use of anti-Islamic material in the U.S. military, and is the government doing enough to put an end to its use? To discuss this, we're joined by CARE's National Communications Director, Ibrahim Hooper, as well as by Morris Davis, the retired Air Force colonel who served as chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay between 2005 and 2007, and Al Jazeera's Josh Rushing, whom we just heard from. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Josh, let me start with you. You had exclusive access to some of this material, and we heard some of what is in it. What else is there in it?
Well, it's literally hundreds of slides. It's hard to make the correlation and know how the presenter connected all of them, but there's clearly a correlation between Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and ultimately Al-Qaeda. In fact, they have one slide in here. It's too gruesome to show on TV, but it shows photos of beheadings and has Muslim Brotherhood at the top of it. So using this kind of fear-based techniques, and also using a technique of just so much information that if you were a student, you must have been overwhelmed and thinking, my gosh, this must be true. When, you know, anyone who knows this stuff is like, well, none of this is connected. There's no real correlation to this group or that group. But their real thrust is that all of these groups, I mean, there's literally dozens of Islamic groups in America, and they connect them all to Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, and say that it's a kind of a singular plan to infiltrate the U.S. at the highest levels.
That's one of their key tactics. We've seen that over the years, is this whole Kevin Bacon game of 6 degrees of separation between any Muslim anywhere in the world and Al-Qaeda. I mean, that's how they play the game.
Right.
And they're constantly promoting these links. If you go to some of these groups' websites, they always have these charts with all the interconnections and all this. It's utter nonsense, but if you don't know what you're talking about or you don't know the real situation, it makes sense.
Okay, before we move on, Josh, has there been any response from the Pentagon to what you've seen?
Indeed, and it's worth noting that the reason Wired.com has the course that they have, taught by Lieutenant Colonel Dooley, and the reason that I have this course, The Threat to America, Understanding the Threat to America, is because military officers at both institutions brought these courses forward. So it is, I think it should be noted that you can't paint the military monolithically on this.
Yeah.
It is not one voice, that these are actors within the military trying to push this information, but other officers are saying, wait a second, that runs against our core values. I was out at the Pentagon today. I spoke to their lead spokesperson, and here's what he had to say.
In all of our learning institutions, we want students to get a wide array of views and perspectives. We want the instruction to challenge them and to challenge some of their thinking. That's all healthy, but it needs to be balanced, and it certainly needs to be in keeping with our core values as an institution. The material that was presented to us as a matter of concern by this young officer student certainly is not in keeping with our values as an institution, and more importantly, not even in keeping with the strategy as we see it in the War on Terror.
Okay, that's the Pentagon spokesman talking there. Let's go to Colonel Davis. Colonel Davis, we heard there from the Pentagon spokesman. What he says seems to be very different from what is contained in these manuals that are being used in some of these staff colleges and educational institutions by the military. How did this stuff get in there?
Well, obviously, there's a percentage of people that share that view. I mean, I've heard it before when I was in the military and in government, that, you know, the philosophy that only good Muslim is a dead Muslim, and it's you know, it's not an insignificant number of people that have that attitude. And so it's unfortunate that in 2012 we still have that kind of thing that exists, but unfortunately it does. I'd commend General Dempsey. I think he acted quickly on this, and it'll be investigated and hopefully rooted out. But I'm afraid Lieutenant Colonel Dooley is probably the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. I was just going to use that exact phrase. This is the tip of the iceberg. We have been seeing this same kind of thing for years. We've been reporting Islamophobic training with the FBI, with DHS, with TSA, the CIA, all of these important institutions. It's all happening under the radar. There's a cottage industry of these Muslim bashers who are training law enforcement personnel, military personnel, counterterrorism personnel, and you're breeding a generation of leaders in our society who have this suspicion of Islam and hostility towards American Muslims and Muslims in general.
What do you believe is the intention of a course like this? Actually, you mentioned in that course that Josh was talking about, yeah.
Yeah. The intention, obviously, of these trainers is to demonize Islam and to marginalize American Muslims. We see it time and time again with the whole everybody is linked to everybody else. You know, somebody met your great Aunt Tilly in 1902 and she said something wrong, so therefore you're associated. I mean, it's all utter nonsense. But as I said, if you don't know the real situation, it can make sense. And you have people who attend these courses, don't hear an opposing view, and just take this forward in their career. But again, thanks to all these individuals. When we hear about a course like that, and we've reported many of these over the years, when we hear about it, it's always from that individual or a few people in the course who went, wait a minute, you know, this just doesn't smell right. When you say that all Muslims should be treated with suspicion, when you say that Islam is inherently evil, and in this case that Mecca and Medina should be wiped off the map, that just isn't American. It isn't productive. It's going to harm our security. It's going to harm our nation's interests and image for years to come. And it's got to stop.
And it sows division, right?
Oh, exactly. It creates divisions within our society. It creates divisions between America and the Muslim world. And it's absolutely unnecessary.
Right. Josh, in your report you mentioned a group that was ostensibly behind this, the source material for this, called Security Engagement. What do we know about that group?
Small group. It has 3 principals. It's located in the Washington, D.C. area. The 3 principals are Stephen Coughlin. That's who's behind the course that Wired.com made public. John Guandolo, who's mentioned in this, he is a former FBI agent and former U.S. Marine, according to his bio. And E.J. Kimball is the 3rd principal, a former staffer from the Hill, worked in Congress. I pulled the documents on the group. They're listed as a charitable organization, so they don't have to pay taxes to the U.S. government. The high irony in that is that they're listed as a educational group for cultural awareness, is how they get around the paying taxes. But they have to list who's on the board when they're that kind of organization. And on the board is listed as Frank Gaffney, who runs the Center for American Security Policy. Gaffney is behind a number of the anti-Islamic movements in the U.S., everything from he will be connected to the anti-Sharia laws that are being passed from state to state, to the there was a big controversy a year or so ago where they were going to build a mosque near Ground Zero, and what happened
he
there?
appeared as a key witness saying you shouldn't have to give Muslims rights under the Constitution. We shouldn't have mosques in America. It was absolutely amazing.
What's interesting is once you start connecting all these dots, you're talking about training that's happening with the New York police and the Ohio police and the CIA and the FBI and the military at this school and the military at that school. There are these strings that all seem to go back to a very, very small group of individuals. I mean, less than 10 people seem to be at the core of this plan, and they have a disproportionately large voice on this issue.
Okay, well, as you also mentioned earlier, Josh, on Thursday, the General of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff spoke about the material that was obtained by Wired.com. That's General Martin Dempsey. Let's listen to what he had to say.
It's totally objectionable. And so we are looking at how that course was approved, what motivated the individual to adopt that. It was an elective, but what motivated that elective from being part of the curriculum. And we are looking across the institutions that provide our professional military education now to make sure there's nothing like that out there. It was just totally objectionable, against our values. And it wasn't academically sound. This wasn't about, pushing back on liberal thought. This was just objectionable, academically irresponsible.
Okay, General Martin Dempsey there. Let's go back to Colonel Davis. Colonel Davis, how concerned are the military top brass about what is happening at the lower levels? And as Ibrahim Hooper pointed out, this must be seen as being counterproductive.
Well, it is counterproductive, and it's disturbing to me. If you look at the materials, it said that this may be a circumstance where we have to put the Geneva Convention aside and go to total war, using the example of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where we killed 250,000 men, women, and children, and proposing we do the same thing in some of the holy sites for Islam. The Geneva Convention has always been our bedrock document for the military. So for a military instructor to stand up in a professional military education course and say we're going to put it aside and go to total war is just astounding.
And what do you make of the fact that General Dempsey has also called for a pretty extensive review of what is being taught at these colleges?
Well, again, I commend him. He acted quickly. He made a very firm statement condemning what was taking place. So I think he's doing the right thing to try to prevent this from happening again going forward. But the school at Norfolk, the Joint Forces School, is just one of many DoD schools. So the curriculum at each one, I think we need to take a look and make sure that this isn't going on in other places.
And we've seen that in the past, too, when we bring it to the attention of the authorities, whether it's the FBI, whether it's the military, DHS, they usually react well. They take it seriously and say, you know, this shouldn't have happened. But it shouldn't have happened in the first place. There needs to be a complete overhaul of the training at all levels, from the state to the federal level, on Islam and Muslims, because we're having a really negative impact on America's future and on the future of American Muslims who are impacted. When we, as an American Muslim, we go to an airport, we just saw within the last couple of days a Muslim toddler was placed on the no-fly list and taken off a flight in Florida, a toddler from New Jersey. So these things can have a really negative impact on the lives of ordinary people.
But yeah, I think here what you need to do, though, is kind of peel the onion back. And I think this goes back to right after 9/11. And you had people in the Bush administration that said the Geneva Conventions are quaint, the gloves are off, the rules don't apply, and whatever means are necessary to keep us safe. And I think that kind of fear-mongering began back then. And it was that mindset at the top that has flowed down to places like Norfolk, where you have a lieutenant colonel that thinks it's acceptable to get up and teach this kind of material.
The irony about that is, going back to 9/11, is that the people who are teaching this kind of material are really doing the bidding of Al-Qaeda. If you look at what Al-Qaeda has written and what's public, is that they really wanted 9/11 to draw the U.S. into a larger war against the entire Islamic world. So they really loved the whole notion of the U.S. on a crusade in the greater Middle East, from Iraq to Afghanistan. It very much plays into their strategy, a strategy that's been made public in their own documents.
The kind of material you uncovered here just puts the wind in the sails of terror groups when they hear these kinds of conspiracy theories promoted within the United States to top leaders, to top officials. It helps America's enemies.
Well, Colonel Davis, they mentioned Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Dooley, who was teaching this course. There's a 31-page presentation there which is entitled, "So What Can We Do?" A counter-jihad op design model comes to some startling conclusions, and here are some of them. Given the factual basis of what Islamists say they seek to impose on the world, the United States has come to accept that radical true Islam is both a political and military enemy to free people throughout the world. And concluding in the final paragraph, "It is therefore time for the United States to make our true intentions clear. This barbaric ideology will no longer be tolerated. Islam must change, or we will facilitate its self-destruction." Josh, let me ask you this. Do we know what's happened to the people who were initially involved in teaching this course?
Well, I know the lieutenant colonel there is no longer teaching that course. At the Pentagon today, they told me that the course meets on Wednesdays. They found out about that on a Thursday, and they stopped it before the following Wednesday meeting. However, he is still in the military, and he is still located at that base while this inquiry moves forward.
Okay, Colonel Davis, to those who were taught this course, what kind of effect would it have had on them?
Well, certainly to be taught in a DOD professional military education course on a military base, it would appear to have the stamp of approval that this is DOD thinking, DOD doctrine, and this kind of attitude is permissible. I mean, I'm pleased to hear that it were other military officers that came forward and said this is wrong. And again, I think Josh was right that there is not a monolithic military that's all of one mindset. So congratulations and kudos to them for having the courage to say, hey, this is wrong.
Right. Ibrahim, here's something we heard from, sorry Josh.
Well, I was just going to add, part of the problem becomes, one of the challenges for the U.S. military right now, particularly in Afghanistan, is there seems to be scandal after scandal, from photos of Marines urinating on corpses, to young soldiers posing with corpses, to sniper squads that have the Nazi SS symbol as their own symbol.
Collecting body parts as trophies.
Collecting body parts. This kind of, I would say, lack of respect for the people where they're conducting these operations, you have to wonder if there isn't a connection at the top. If you teach this at the top, that culture at the top permeates down. Now, I asked the spokesperson at the Pentagon today that, and he said, look, millions of Americans have served and served honorably in both Iraq and Afghanistan. It's the actions of a small few that you're pointing out, and it's not fair to taint the actions of everyone who's ever served there with this. But clearly there's a culture at the bottom that starts somewhere, and the leadership has to be responsible for that. So if the leadership is learning this in their courses, in their professional military training, you can kind of start to connect the dots and see where it's coming from.
Okay. This is what Dooley said, I guess in his defense. He says that what he teaches is not official U.S. policy, Ibrahim, but intended to generate what he termed dynamic discussion.
Oh yeah, that always is the argument of last resort. Oh, I just wanted to stimulate debate, or it's just a bizarre and stupid argument that somehow you're going to give this kind of material and then hope that, well, they'll disregard it if they think it's not credible. Well, it's not credible in the first place, so why are you offering it to these individuals?
It's just more clever than that in the sense that on the bullet points of the course, the very first bullet point is what you're about to learn is considered not politically correct and will be criticized because of that. So point number one is if they criticize it, that even gives it more credibility. Yeah. Right. And so when this criticism comes as like, you know, these aren't valid arguments, what you're teaching is completely objectionable. They say, essentially they say, See, we told you, that's our first point.
And how would you retrain people who have gone through these courses? Right. Because they've already been immunized against this whole notion that, you know, this is somehow politically correct, right. So whatever somebody else tells you, it's false. It's the corollary to the argument that these people make is, well, Muslims are taught to lie. So that anything they say that's good, disregard it because they're lying to you. But if they tell you something's bad, well, believe that because Islam is evil. So it's
that principle is actually in this course.
Yeah, it's a circular argument that prevents any criticism.
Right. Let's look at kind of political dimension to this, because some members of Congress have expressed reservations over the fact that the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense ordered a review of education programs. Mm-hmm. A Republican Congresswoman, Sue Wilkins Myrick from North Carolina, wrote to Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta and the Attorney General Eric Holder, and she said, "We are concerned that the political nature of these reviews might inadvertently weaken our law enforcement and military counterterrorism training programs by censoring certain language that is used to objectively identify the asymmetrical threats that are present in today's world." As you well know, accurately defining the threat is an important step in creating and enforcing successful counterterrorism doctrines.
Can I jump in on that? Because this is interesting. Someone sent me that letter, another concerned military officer out of the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. And you know how I said that there are strings to every one of these stories, and they seem to go back to the same knot in the middle. Mm-hmm. So if you look at who used to work for her in Congress, mm-hmm. E.J. Kimball is her former staffer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. E.J. Kimball is one of the 3 principals at the Strategic Engagement Group. So it goes right back, even the letter from Congress that's trying to hold the Pentagon accountable for questioning this material goes right back to strategic engagement.
Sue Myrick was one of these 4 Congress people who brought up the whole Manchurian intern issue, that, God forbid, CARE would want to put interns in Congress, like every other nonprofit group on Capitol Hill, but somehow when Muslims did it, it was nefarious.
Okay, let's go to Colonel Davis. Colonel Davis, is the counter to this you know, somebody saying something against it at the highest levels of the U.S. government, including perhaps the White House on a sustained basis?
I think so. Again, I think you got to start at the top and let it percolate down. So again, General Dempsey, I think, did the right thing by condemning this. I think it would be helpful if other leaders in government did the same. You know, one of the real ironies in this, that, you know, all Muslims are bad, is there was an expose recently that the head of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, where the drone strikes are being planned, is a Muslim. And many of the members that were involved in the military commissions trying to hold terrorists accountable were Muslim. So, you know, this notion that, you know, that all Muslims are bad is just, you know, not supported factually. And I'm afraid, though, that like Lieutenant Colonel Dempsey, you know, in some small circles that are influential, you know, he's going to be a hero for what he did.
Right. Ibrahim, we have 30 seconds. Also, should the American Muslim community be brought in on a larger scale?
Oh, the American Muslim community has offered time and time again to work with law enforcement, work with the military, work at all levels of the society to make sure that there's an accurate and balanced portrayal of Islam to these officials, to train, to do any positive thing in the society, but sometimes that offer is not accepted.
Okay, gentlemen, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And that is it from the team in Washington, D.C. for now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And of course, we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.